Good evening, everyone. My name is Kyle Smith. I'm a Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Trinity College. Thank you all for joining us for what is actually our second event in our College Decoded series. Right, this is actually our second season of College Decoded. We ran this once in the fall, and we had great success. So we're revamping it and doing this again in what is essentially the spring for us. And we've added a few new programs, including this program tonight, Admissions in the Context of COVID, a pretty timely conversation, and by the registration count, a conversation that many of you are intrigued to have right now. Before we get into the heart of the conversation, I want to draw your attention to a few logistical items. We are recording tonight's discussion. Right? We're only hosting this tonight, but we know that this conversation is something that many of prospective students and families are interested in having, so we're going to record it and so we can share it with a much larger audience in a few days. The recording will be posted on our College Decoded webpage. So for many of you, it's the same webpage that you went to register for this event. You'll see there'll be a little link right under this, the description for this event that'll have the recording. Right. And we'll also share some of the frequently asked questions and some of the questions that you pose and the responses in that same place. I have a series of questions prepared tonight, but we're going to set aside time for you to ask questions as well. I hope that this can be a bit of an interactive conversation. At any point, feel free to drop questions into the chat, right? And we'll address those kind of in the second half of the conversation. As I said, for any questions that we're not able to answer, we're going to post them on the College Decoded website so you can see the responses and circle back to them. Right. Until the official Q&A session begins, I ask that you remain on mute, right? And now maybe silently, please join me in welcoming our panel. Tonight, we're joined by Damien Fatania, Catherine Goldberg, Jen Bowman, and Adrian Odie. And I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves and give you a little bit of context of who they are and how they help students and families to and through this college journey. So Catherine, if you would, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Goldberg. I am the Associate Director of College and Career Counseling at Achievement First Amistad High School in New Haven. So I'm serving as a college counselor and working with our team here, supporting our juniors and seniors through the college application process. The majority of the students that I'm working with are the first in their family to go to college. We are a public charter school. And many are also students of color and also going to qualify for Pell Grants. So I am working in all aspects of the college process, from list creation, essay, feedback, matriculation decisions, lots of financial aid support along the way. And then prior to this role, I served as an alumni counselor with Achievement First. So I also worked with students all the way through their college experience. So a lot of my work as a college counselor is informed by the experiences of predominantly first-generation students as they navigate into a new educational system through college. So thank you for having me tonight.
Excellent. Thanks, Catherine. Damien, if you would.
Hi, everyone. Damien Fatomia here from La Jolla Country Day School in San Diego, California. This is now my third class that I've worked with here. Prior to this, I was on the college admissions side. Kyle was one of my colleagues when I was at Trinity, and I also worked for another university based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. In the role that I play here and in the population that I work with, many of them are high-income families who are looking far and wide, and they are, somewhat savvy with this whole situation with the college search process. And then we also have a number of students here who are international students from abroad as well. And so in helping them navigate the American system and working with the different firms that they work with to get them here to our schools. So not necessarily as sort of deep in the financial aid areas as far as the work, but certainly in terms of selective universities and counseling students around that process, which tends to be a lot of the aim of our students that we work with.
Excellent. Thank you, Damien. Jen, if you would.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. And thanks for inviting me for the panel here. I feel honored I'm Jen Bowman. I coach the women's volleyball team at Trinity. I've been at Trinity for 16 years, heading into my 17th season this coming fall. Hopefully, we will be playing this fall. Obviously, COVID has impacted a lot of things, and athletic recruiting is certainly a big one. So I'm here to kind of give my insights and ideas around what's happening now in the world of athletic recruiting and in terms of COVID and how it's affected everyone. Really, it's so yeah. I've been at Trinity for many recruiting cycles and seen many changes throughout the almost 17 years. So hopefully I can offer some good insight for everybody. But I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Jen. And Adrian.
Good evening or afternoon or day, I suppose, with folks joining us from all over the world and Zoom world now. I'm Adrian Odie, Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid here at Trinity. Interesting fact, I've been working at Trinity longer as a remote worker than as an in-person worker. And so for students and families navigating this process in a predominantly virtual space, it is definitely possible to learn and understand a community in the virtual world, but takes a little bit of different kind of effort. I came to Trinity from spending several years in my home state of Georgia at Berry College, and I've also worked at Tier 1 Research University at University of Rochester in Western New York, and another small liberal arts college just in a rural setting in Ohio. So excited to be with y'all this evening.
And I wish I could pick up on that segue because that's an awesome segue into my first question. But before I do that, I'd be remiss if I didn't call out Emily Petersell, my colleague, who we call Pete, who is on the back end of this Zoom meeting, who is handling the logistics for us today. So if you drop in a question, Pete might be helping us direct that question. And we couldn't do this without her. So thank you, Pete. My first question, pick up on this segue, is this is for Catherine. In light of the travel restrictions related to COVID, what tips are you giving your students and families about familiarizing themselves with colleges at this time?
So I would say, particularly with the students I'm working with, these kinds of travel restrictions are real, just in terms of finances and being able to travel. So I have students every year who will apply to schools far and wide, who make decisions to enroll without ever having stepped foot on campus. So in some ways, this is very similar to what I've been used to and what my students are wrapping their heads around. And in other ways, it's very different. I think everyone knows do the virtual tours, do the info sessions, go to the info sessions that are specific to your school. But if I think about something that's a little bit more unique or different than just that, I think a lot about how can you connect with other people who have connections or relationships or knowledge of those campuses. So are there people who've gone to your high school, alumni, or teachers who work in your schools who have connections or relationships with colleges that they attended or had visited or worked at along the way, to be able to have that conversation and be able to ask honestly what it's like to be on those campuses. And I think that's particularly important for students of color who may be wanting to know, what is the vibe on this place on campus and how can I get that in an honest and authentic way, rather than sort of just what's out in the brochures. So I think about it as do the things you're supposed to do and work those networks. Just anybody you ask along the way, hey, have you ever heard of this college? What do you think about this college? A lot of my students will say, my mom came home from work yesterday and she mentioned that college that you recommended, and her coworker was like, oh my gosh, that's phenomenal, and my niece goes there, or something like that. So making those connections to be able to get that inside look at college is my best recommendation.
Thank you. And Jen, a similar question to you. As students, prospective student athletes wanting to learn more about playing sports at the college level, what sort of tips do you have for them about learning about a program?
Yeah, well, they should always start with reaching out to the coach or the coaching staff, always. And from there, now in this world, as was just mentioned, we're living in a Zoom world. You have to make those connections. We have to see film. We're not allowed to travel. They're not allowed to travel. So it goes both ways. So how do we evaluate? How do we see someone play? We rely heavily on film. We're relying heavily on Zoom calls to build that relationship. It's not perfect, but it's what we have right now. So, I mean, I think a lot of people have really taken advantage of it. I mean, I didn't even know what Zoom was probably this time last year. And it's been an awesome tool. Kyle, you've been on a couple webinars we've done with our recruits for volleyball, and other coaches have done the same thing. You can almost have like home visits because I get to talk to parents, I get to see family members, things that I wasn't able to do before without them buying a plane ticket and coming to Trinity. So it's been eye-opening in some ways. So, but back to your original question, just to echo what Catherine said, you have to build those relationships, and that just starts with maybe an email to begin with, but then you got to get on the phone, you got to get on Zoom, you got to get in front of that coach, and we're relying heavily on video. So obviously we got to see you play. So some people might not have video because they might not have been able to play recently, depending on what area of the country that you're in. Some areas are full go, and others are in a lockdown. So just be creative, do the best you can. But we definitely need to see you play.
And Adrian, from I guess the college admissions side of the table, what sort of initiatives are schools like Trinity doing to help get the word out to students, prospective students, and share kind of the sense of belonging, the sense of who we are, and why Trinity might be a good fit?
Yeah, I can echo what Jen and Catherine were saying, and trying to build relationships just from our seat in this experience. So certainly programs like this, where we get to talk more broadly about college, I think certainly brings me a lot of joy. I selfishly want everyone on this call to be a Bantam, but also know that what Trinity has to offer will resonate with some folks and it won't resonate with other folks. And both are really good feelings to have as you learn about colleges, because it helps you focus and prioritize. We are still visiting or meeting with high school students via Zoom. We've been in a position of privilege and being able to operate some very small, socially distanced on-campus visit experiences for folks who are either in the area already or are able to travel for any number of reasons. We've been calling students more, and so everything that is old is new again. So I think it's really great practice for students to get to be on the phone. You'll use it a lot in a professional setting, as we are learning right alongside you in this experience. So don't be afraid to talk to college admissions officers, even just as practice for life and having conversations and building relationships. Like, I'm very happy to be your practice phone call so that you feel really confident when you're talking with the school that you really want to be talking to, if it's not Trinity. But Hartford's beautiful. It's right behind me right now. So I got to put that plug in too.
Excellent. And I know I'm merely the host here, but one tip that I have that I've been kind of pushing more and more, and I recognize a number of the names in our audience today, so you've probably heard me say this before, follow schools' social media accounts, right? And not just the main handle, right? Not the main Instagram page. Follow the volleyball team, follow the mock trial team, follow the things that you are interested in. The school might have an organization that you're interested in, and follow those accounts, because those are probably not run by someone who's paid to make it look fancy, right? That's probably run by a student, and that'll give you a sense of whether this is the right fit for you. Maybe, but it's at least an easy entry point to making a connection with an institution. Damien, you're up next. How are you guiding students to put their best selves forward in an application, knowing that there have been limitations on opportunities to showcase their abilities? As Jen said, right, you might not be able to play sports, activities have been canceled, standardized testing has been limited, and opportunities might not exist. What are some tips you're giving your students that would be helpful for students around the world?
Yeah, it's a crazy world that we've been experiencing this past year, and certainly helping students really think critically about other ways or alternative ways to be able to showcase their talents or their gifts. And so, some of the things that we've talked about here at our school is, really dependent on what their interests are. For example, I actually have a great student of mine who's very interested in theater tech. And the young lady obviously lives and dies by the theater here on our campus, which she hasn't been able to access for about 12, 13 months. And so in turn, what she's done at her home is build these mini sets of figurines in her space, right? So, and in a way, she sort of used a lot of those that her creative juices to put that together and photographing them to put together a portfolio. And yes, it's not sort of this grand scheme of thing that you typically would see on our campus, but another way of showcasing herself and her talents. There have been some other creative ways that students have been able to do these, amazing things. Some of our athletes are doing online coaching for 5, 7-year-olds. That's been pretty cool to see. Others have sort of started tutoring other students in the neighboring areas here in our region. So really it's about, for us, it's telling students to, what is it that they're interested in and being able to find creative ways to kind of implement that remotely. And that's sort of how they've started to lean into that.
Thank you. And Catherine, any tips that you've been sharing with your students and families about how to put their best selves forward in an application?
Yeah, I think the personal statement was naturally one where we went to this fall, and thinking a lot about how can you dig deep in that self-reflection to like really clarify who you are, what your values are, what's important to you, and then convey that through the writing along the way. So doing activities like values exercises for students to really reflect on that and probably just go deeper than sort of this is an event that happened and more in terms of like, this is who I am, this is what my goals are, and this is how I see myself moving forward in that mission. Like we've had this time to reflect, so how can we channel that in writing? And then I think similar to what Damien is talking about, but kind of like with a twist, is helping students unpack the unique and interesting things that they are doing that they might not realize are interesting or unique. So I have a senior this year who was looking at an essay question about community, and he's like, there is no community right now, Ms. Goldberg. Like everything, we've been remote since March 13th last year. And he actually kind of dug deep and reflected that he started this Discord channel for his senior class and talked about how he built community in this virtual space for his classmates. And like when I had talked with him, that never came up with him. And then he had started to draw the connection of like, oh, that's actually what I'm doing on a deeper level through this sort of surface level thing that was just a way to hang out with his friends in this virtual space. So trying to get that other perspective on your own life to kind of pull out what are those interesting or unique things to help somebody understand who you are and how it could translate when things return to normal, whatever our post-COVID normal is.
Yeah, that's been very exciting to see the creativity, right? So at Trinity, we've been reviewing applications for a number of weeks, months now, and it's been really inspiring to see the creativity that students are displaying in their applications and what they've been doing in this time where things aren't normal. So I encourage the students in the audience to continue being creative, continue putting yourself out there, trying new things, stepping out of your comfort zone in a safe way, and remember to keep washing your hands afterwards. Adrian, question for you, and actually, I think a nice progression here. How has the way we've evaluated, colleges evaluate applicants changed during COVID-19? Right. So I'll say that again. How has the way that we've evaluated applicants changed during COVID-19?
I think in a lot of ways for us at Trinity, the way we're reviewing applications feels really familiar. This is like the most normal part of the year. And as we look at the last year, because we already spent a lot of time with your applications and got to know the context of your schools and your school, the difference this year is your schools are sharing more information with us about what has changed in the classroom and in your school communities due to COVID-19. So we're getting even more information from high schools about that experience. Students are certainly showing in really visible and overt ways their resilience and creativity. And in previous years, I think we may have had to unpack that a little bit more, have had to have different conversations, but we've been able to connect with students one-on-one in more ways. So I think there's a face to more applications compared to previous years, which is just a little bit interesting to sit with because we're separate but together more. We've continued to see more students not submitting test scores, which feels like old hat for us here at Trinity. So I think we're paying even more attention to students and really looking for your voices and your experiences and trying to figure out ways to say yes to you. But I know my colleagues at other schools that are reviewing applications without test scores for the very first time, who have had to figure out how to spend more time with applications because they got more or different or have different staffing. Like that has been a bigger change for other schools. But for us, since we're small and already value that personalized experience, it's just adding and looking at things through the COVID-19 lens more so than big dramatic changes to our process.
I have a follow-up question that I'm going to start with you, Adrian, and then kind of move around the horn here. So this year on the Common App, there is a new section called community disruptions, right? It's kind of this COVID-19 question. What has happened in your life that has maybe changed because of COVID-19? The question is, how do admissions counselors use the information from the COVID-19 question on the Common Application? And what should students put there?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer because every student is different and every community is different. But I selfishly hope that the community disruption question remains going forward on the other side of the pandemic, because there are communities that are disrupted all over the world all the time. So it gives students a space to speak to that specific instance that's happening outside of them so that the rest of the application really can be about the student themselves. You don't have to choose, do I write my essay about this disruptive moment or can I write my essay about something else? Because there's a space in the application now to talk about the disruption we're all experiencing. But I know that this isn't the first time some of our students who are applying this year have experienced major health pandemics. And so reading from students all over the world, there's some references to other pandemics that have been more contained within countries or regions of countries than just this one. And it, like, if something is happening to you as a person that is sort of different, you're experiencing the pandemic differently than your community, it's good to use that specific response to talk about that. Or if you want a space to talk about how you're experiencing community disruption, pandemic or otherwise, because that question is going to be around next year too, then use that space. But if you don't have anything more to say beyond what your school is sharing with us in their information and other parts of the application, I don't want students to feel like they have to write one more essay or one more response, because there's lots of essays that you'll be writing and lots of responses that you'll be working on. So please use it as a microphone if you want to speak into it, but don't feel like you have to say something if there's other stuff you need to be working on.
Thank you. I'm glad you added that bit at the end, because that's a question that I think many of our colleagues get frequently. Like, what should I put there? Do I have to put something there? Like, am I not going to get admitted if I don't put anything there? Short answer is no. You don't have to put anything there. But I wonder, Catherine or Damien, have you had experience recently with helping students fill out that section? And do you have other tips that you might want to share, that you can share? I know that oftentimes, especially what I've seen, it's very sensitive information. So I'm not asking for anything personal, but are there any tips that you might have?
I think just what you said is really important. And the way that we've worked with students is really about their choice of what to disclose and if it's appropriate to disclose. And I just want to reiterate that for everybody, that it is your choice. There is no obligation there. And my school counselor hat comes in there, and it was actually quite a helpful tool and sort of entry point into some conversations about the ways that things had changed for some students. And I think for us, the students who felt comfortable and ready to move forward with it, it was helpful to have that as a release place for some of those things. And then there are students who chose to opt out of it, and it was helpful for them to know that they didn't have to as well. So I think reflecting for yourself, is this helpful for me, or is this adding an extra burden that I feel like I need to perform in a specific way? Damien, I'm curious if you have other thoughts too.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what everybody else has mentioned already. With the population of students that I work with here, the pandemic really, how should I say this in a way that isn't, that comes off in it was certainly an inconvenience, but not impactful, where parents and families were losing jobs. Like the worst thing, whether the worst thing that they were dealing is staying home and because of the restrictions. And so for many of the families that we've worked with, the students we worked with this year, that space was left empty because there wasn't information that needed to be communicated to show impact. Yes, there were a few students that did write that because of the situation in their home, but for the majority of students that I work with, because of the population here at the school that I work for, wasn't impacted as drastically as some of the other communities in the country.
Thank you. This next set of questions is, I think, geared towards Jen and Adrian, right? And so it's around this idea of students taking a gap year, right? And an increase in students taking a gap year, and what that might do for one, coaches' rosters, right? And two, the process for admitting students in general to a class. So let me see if I can kind of decipher this. Has there been a significant increase in the number of students who are electing to take a gap year before college? Yeah. And how will this impact admissions and enrollment for students in future cycles? And what impact will it have on coaches and their rosters? Adrian, I'll start with you.
Sounds good, Kyle. I think it's important to think about the driver behind the question too. And oftentimes, I've been asked this question a lot over the last 8 months or so. And I think there's this feeling, particularly among prospective students and families, that there won't be space for me because more students have chosen to take a different path. And so they're taking up my space. And the reality is, at most colleges, there will be space for you, whether you come in August, if you're a senior and planning to go the more traditional route, if you want to start in January, if you want to start 2 years from now, there's space for you in college if you want to be in college. And so I hope as you continue moving through this experience, you can just let go of the notion and set yourself free of the constraints that there won't be space. And then more specifically, there may not be space at a few institutions or on a few teams at a specific point in time. So yes, we saw a few more students take a gap year at Trinity. For us, we're talking about a difference in 10 students from the prior years to this year electing to take a gap year. So from the college perspective, we can admit the same number of students and welcome the same class size because we can handle an additional 10 students here and there. Some of my colleagues have seen 100 students on a same class size take a gap year. And so that does dramatically change their process. And I'll certainly defer to Jen to talk about the implications for athletics, where if it was 10 students and they were all volleyball players, that's the whole volleyball team. So it could be real tough in that instance as well.
Yeah, so that is an interesting question. I mean, most of the student athletes at Trinity are recruited student athletes, and so taking a gap year is a little bit different. It's a little odd. It doesn't happen that much, but that's really something, that's a conversation that you would have with that respective sport coach, right? Because everybody's rosters needs are different. Everybody has a different philosophy about how they want to fill out their roster. So that's really sport by sport, I would say. And that is I really want to urge you, if you are a student athlete, to have that conversation, have that question of, what's your roster like? How many are coming back? How much space do you have available? Where do you see me in that picture? All of those sort of things. That's important information to know if being on that team is really important to you. That's actually critical to know. So that is, it may be a little daunting or intimidating to ask that question, but I really want to stress that you should advocate for yourself and get that information. That's going to be sport by sport, and it's a little bit complicated now because of COVID. There's a blanket eligibility waiver so that even the current student athletes that we have now get another year. So even if you look at a roster and you think, oh, this team has 5 seniors, so they're going to graduate a lot of people, there's going to be room. There might not be room. That might not be the case, because they retain that eligibility. So it's going to be sport by sport. I encourage you to have that conversation, and don't be intimidated by that conversation. It's one that everybody should be having, and every coach at Trinity would, I'm sure, welcome that, because we want what's best for everybody. Like Adrian said earlier, whether you get off of this and you say, oh man, Trinity's not for me, like that's good information too, right? One way or the other, it's good information. So I really encourage you to have that conversation with each coach.
Excellent, thank you. I want to remind the audience to feel free to drop questions into the chat function. We're going to open it up to a Q&A in a few minutes. But again, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll try to address them as they come up. This next question, I'm jumping back to Damien and Catherine. In your experience, and shining your experience on where we are today in higher education and the college application process, what are some things that you see people worrying about, students and families worrying about, that they really don't need to?
Do you want to go first, Catherine?
I can go first.
I guess so a couple of things. One thing that a lot of the students that I work with tend to stress about are college interviews. And they lose sleep, like my students lose sleep. We'll have multiple practice interviews. And I tell them, this is a two-way street here when you go into these virtual meetings with senior student associates or alumni. I tell them that interviews rarely will ever hurt an applicant. And so, I've with I'm sure Catherine and all the college counselors, they know their students very well, and they'll sort of make that options to practice and train them up for those meetings. But that tends to be something that a lot of our students worry about, that, at least from my perspective, isn't going to be a very impactful piece when the final decision is made.
Yeah, I had 2 examples popped in my head. I think one was regarding SAT scores this year, and I had a student who had applied early decision to a highly selective school and was deferred. And sort of that understandable emotional first reaction was, oh, I should have taken the SAT. They had applied SAT optional to that school because we didn't have an opportunity to test. Our school had closed, and Connecticut was hit early, so there were not a lot of options for testing. And so that one just really hit in another level of it. There are so many factors going on right now, and I just really felt for a student who felt like I should have taken that risk to take the SAT. And my perspective is you made the right call in putting your health and your family's health first and foremost, and that there were so many factors outside of your control beyond the SAT that we just don't know. And that may have been the reason for the deferral rather than just not having SATs. So thinking about that SAT optional element and sort of bringing the stress down about that. And then the other one actually is similar to what Damien is saying about interviews, but I have students who we know that you all get flooded with millions of emails on a daily basis. And like all of us, like myself, some of them fall through the cracks and you realize you didn't respond to it. And so I had a student who just came panicked and was like, I just realized that I never responded to that alumni interview request. And that was sent to me 2 months ago. Like, I'm not going to get in because of that. And just having the conversation with that student of mistakes happen, and it actually shows greater character if you can stand up and say, hey, I missed this email. Is there still an opportunity to connect? The worst thing is it falls through the cracks on their end and it sort of goes into a gray area. But on the plus side, you could end up building a connection, and your honesty and your willingness to be brave in that moment could come off in a positive way. So.
I love that one, Catherine, and I'm over here snickering to myself because in our office, I send a lot of those emails, and it's always funny to see, oh, the student never actually opened that email. They are calling. And, I can't throw a stone in the glass house because my inbox gets inundated and, I can't respond to everything that comes in. But I think that's a great tip. Thank you.
And through the beauty of Zoom, I was actually able to pull up an email I had just sent that morning to the student. I was like, look, here's how I did it when I didn't respond to something right away. So
excellent. So we did have a question come in that I'm going to direct to Adrian. And the question says, now that many schools are test optional, if a student does plan to test, how would you advise a student on deciding whether or not to submit scores to colleges?
We'll give the classic admission officer answer and say it depends. But if you feel confident about testing and good about the safety precautions and things like that, and that's something that you want to be a part of your process, when you get your score back, if you're really proud of that score and you think it's an important part of your story, you should send it, because we're really looking to see you and your story and what's important to you. I will couch that by saying most schools, not all, there's been a small movement to stop posting middle 50% ranges of scores, to stop posting average scores, because to the example Catherine just gave a moment ago, it's an easy thing to attach yourself to as a student. Like, you can see your score. If you and your friends are talking about scores, you know what your friends' scores are. Similarly with GPA. And so we can take this entire process that's filled with complexity and nuance and distill it down to, on the outside, just a couple of scores, a GPA and a test score. So if you see those middle 50% scores, if you see the ranges, if you see the averages, and there's a school that's pretty high on your list and your score is not either within the middle 50% range or exceeding the middle 50% range, if your score is not at or above average and that institution is test optional, you're trying to give us reasons to say yes here. So I would just withhold that score so that I don't have to see it. Like, I'm a human being in this process. I can try to ignore things that might not be serving you, especially as your advocate and partner in this work, but I can't unsee things that are sent to me ultimately. So it is up to you. If you're proud of it and it's who you are, great. We love to see what you're proud of. Mathematically, since I studied math in school, if you're not at or above published averages, I would send something else to us.
Excellent, thanks. Jen, maybe a question for you. So you gave the tip about making sure that you reach out to the coaching staff and that you ask right questions. Do you have any other tips for students who are interested in pursuing athletics in college that might be helpful for, especially like there are a lot of juniors in this call right now.
Yeah,
Students.
got lots of tips, lots of tips. First of all, be easy for the coach to work with. And by that, I mean, make your video easily accessible. Don't put it on some recruiting service where the coach has to sign up and jump through all these hoops to get to it. YouTube channels are great, easy, one click and we're there. You may have Huddle, depending on the sport that you're involved with. Huddle may be an option, but just easy ways to get information to the coach. Always include your year of graduation in your subject, your position, your year of graduation right in the subject, or have an email signature so all that information's right there. You could even include, if you are playing, your schedule of competition in your email signature. Just make it once, it's always there, it's easy. What coaches don't like and don't really have the time for is to be searching to find out who you are and what year you're going to graduate and all that sort. So if you just make it easy, in the subject, I'm a 2022 6'4" middle hitter, like that's awesome. I'm going to click on that email. So just present yourself well and easy so that we can find who you are quickly. And the same with the video. We shouldn't watch the video and not know who you are on the court. Just clearly identify yourself. I'm the one wearing the red shirt, or I'm number 11, or I'm starting in this position, or whatever, just so it's easy. If I click on a video and I've watched a minute and I have no idea who you are, I'm not going to watch the rest of the video. I'm going to write you back and say, can you identify yourself? I don't know who you are in this video. I'm not going to try to figure it out. So yeah, long story short, be easy to work with. Make it easy for the coach to find you, to see you. Yeah, I think that's really good, a really good tip.
Excellent, thank you. This is a question that I actually think both Adrian and Jen can answer, because it's specific about Trinity College. How safe is the environment at Trinity during times of COVID-19? Throughout the time spent on campus, are tests readily available? I'll start with Jen.
Yeah, so the testing center is actually in one of our athletic facilities, our field house. All the students at Trinity are tested twice a week. All the faculty and staff have been tested once a week. So there's tons of COVID testing, tons. I'm sure some of you on this call have been tested quite a bit, as have I. So yeah, I think we have done a fantastic job with that. I think it feels super safe. We had restrictions in place in the fall. We were able to practice. All the teams actually were able to practice. We had to be masked. We had to be socially distant. We had to go through phases before we could actually get to actual competition. So, which we didn't ever play outside competition. I'm talking about just 6-on-6 or just within ourselves. So it was super safe. Maybe some might even argue it was a little over the top safe. So we tested a ton and we took lots of great precautions, I think.
Yeah, Jen pretty much covered it from my perspective. I mean, I'm on campus pretty regularly, and folks are like, everybody who's on campus wants to stay on campus. I think we started this talking a little bit about community and what that means. And like folks at Trinity want it to be, everybody wants it to be successful. So people are getting their regular tests, they're wearing their masks, they're generally staying together but apart. So it was a really, interesting way to see the strength of the community and the togetherness of the community and the buy-in that everyone had this last semester, so that we could be pretty much all in person, working as close to a normal college experience as we could have.
Excellent, thank you. So another question that I'm going to start with you, Adrian, on, and the question is on optional score reporting for AP work, right? The question is, how does optional score reporting for APs work? Would it look bad if I only reported the scores for the tests that I thought I did well on and not all of them? Is it bad to drop exams / not report scores even though you took the class?
We care much more that you took the class and you took that challenge than we do in general on about scores. Same with testing. We care much more about the classes that you're taking day in and day out in high school and how you're performing in them versus how you perform on one Saturday morning or a couple of Saturday mornings. So similarly to standardized testing, the SAT or ACT, if you're really proud of your AP score and you want to send it our way, please feel free to send it. You can be selective in that. For folks taking AP classes earlier in high school, they could be a part of your review process. We look at a lot of details. We look at the individual courses you're taking, we look at the grades, we look at how those change over time, we read the responses. But I'm not sure that we would get so far into the details that we'll see, oh, Kyle took AP US history and got an A, but I don't see that AP US history score. Like for me, Kyle took AP US history, got an A, great. If there's a score and it's a 3, 4, or 5, I'm going to continue to celebrate Kyle's history knowledge. And if it's a 1 or a 2, I'm generally going to think, oh, he must have had a bad day because he got a really good grade in the course. And that's going to speak more to the consistency of effort than the one experience. So do what makes you smile in those score reporting situations.
Excellent, thank you. And maybe now back to our counseling friends. So Catherine, you'd mentioned that with the students at your school, you work on list creation, helping them create lists. I wonder if you have any tips that you could share with our audience about how to go about starting to create a college list.
Yeah, I think like no-brainer around having a balanced list and having reaches, having your probables, having your very probables. I think a lot about, and I think this kind of overlapped with one of the first questions, and less of like, how do you put your best foot forward? How do you find the best connection, the best overlap between your identity and then a college's identity? And so, because when those sparks happen, then the entire process is significantly easier. There will always be essays that are put off to the last minute, but usually when it's really hard to write a supplemental essay for a college, it might mean it's a tough match there. So I think it sounds really dry and really boring, but take a look at the mission statement of a college. Does it resonate? Like when you read it, what are 3 words that pop out to you? Are those 3 words that also align for you? Look outside your comfort zone, right? I found my future home because one of my best friends went and visited and hated it. And I was like, okay, we're kind of different, so maybe I will like it. And then just on a very practical level, having the financial conversation with your parents to the level that your family's comfortable, and then making your list with that in mind. So if you know you're going to need financial aid to be an important part in this process, or need-based aid an important part of the process, make sure that the bulk of your college list has schools that meet 100% of demonstrated financial need, or are regional or state schools as well, so that you have those financial choices on the table. It always feels good to say no to one when you have 2 choices than to only go to the one, because that's the only financially feasible option on the table. So that's kind of some starters.
Excellent. Damien, anything to add?
Yeah, a couple things to add. I think a lot of the self-reflection takes place early on in this college list building process. For a lot of the students that we work with, particularly the school that I work at, it's a small school. I think there's about 400 students in the upper school, and they all say, I want to go to a big school. University of Alabama hit me with that. University of Texas Austin hit me with that. And then we start to unpack what that is, what that experience is like. they like the Saturday mornings and the Saturday football days, but then thinking about classes and what that would look like for them, then they realize, like, deer the headlights, like maybe not. I really like having discussions and debates, like in Mr. Schulman's class. Like, can you find me schools that kind of offer that opportunity? So kind of thinking deeply to yourself about what type of a learner you are and what kind of environment you need to be successful in as a student. And obviously socially with your interests, making sure that that aligns. The mission statement piece is also a big thing that I preach a lot with the students that I work with to make sure that it aligns with your values. And then the other piece that I also start to counsel students around is don't discount your local university or college in your backyard, particularly with the environment that we're in right now. A lot of our students kind of scrambled last minute last year. Hey, I don't know if I can go that far away. Can you help me think about schools that's going to be local here in Southern California within an hour and a half drive? So that's also something just to kind of keep in mind. And that could be sort of a safety school, like worst case scenario, like a pandemic. Right? So just something to also keep in mind there.
Cool. And Catherine, maybe back to you. Do you have any tips for getting recommendations from teachers if you'll be a virtual student for your entire junior year? Are sophomore year teachers okay?
Yeah, we are wrestling with this one at Amistad High School. We have recommended for students based on GPA to use a junior and a senior year teacher, and then for students who maybe had some slower starts to high school, it's okay to use a sophomore year teacher because of the kinds of colleges that students are applying to. So for students who are applying to schools like Trinity or those other selective institutions, we really do recommend junior and senior year and a balance of the math science with a humanities, just to get the full spectrum. But I do think I am curious to see if that sophomore year recommendation pops a little bit more because that's the last time that people were there. I'm going to trust that the good folks on this call have their cameras on and engage in Zoom virtual learning. But if you are not doing that, start doing that. It will make a big difference. It will reflect really well if the teachers can actually write in the letter that says, like, who's the only student who was particularly engaged, or he was particularly engaged along the way. So I think letters of recommendation could be looking different in the next year or two, and I'm curious to see how that goes. But engage in those classes. If it's not in full class, go to the office hours, send a well-crafted email that kind of explains why it's hard for you to engage in that setting if that's the case for you.
Thank you. And actually, Adrian, a similar question to you from our side of the table. When we're reviewing an application, what is it that you're looking for in a letter of recommendation? Like, is a sophomore year teacher something that we want to see? Are we okay to see a seventh grade teacher? What do we want to see?
Yeah, I think folks who can speak to recent academic experiences with you are the recommendations that tend to stand out if we're speaking in kind of broad strokes. Going all the way back to middle school, if that's the last time you were interacting with that teacher, might be a little bit of a stretch. But if there's a teacher who you wanted to stay after class and talk to that teacher about that subject, and it happened to be your 10th grade geometry teacher, like that teacher is going to have a relationship with you. They're probably going to have a continued relationship with you if they're still at the school and you're still at the school, because you were just so excited about geometry and so excited about math. So that could be a really great recommendation because you've developed that relationship with a teacher over time. So for us, we're not interested in drawing strict lines in the sand. It really is about painting that picture of you as a student from the perspective of a teacher who you've had. And yes, we would prefer a teacher later in high school because you tend to be a better student later in high school. Even if your grades are exactly the same, you just grow a lot in high school and the teachers pay attention to that. So that's why we're looking for the more recent ones, because you start to figure yourself out a little bit more. You respond to the material with some more depth and maturity. It's not because we're like, 11th grade is the most meaningful year. It just happens to be a year of a lot of growth for you as a person. So that's why things are skewed toward that year.
And Emily Barr asked a question that I think you just touched upon, Adrian. She says, what about teachers who can attest to your growth? Right? And yes, growth is something that we want to hear about. Right. And I also think this question about letters of recommendation is one of those that warrants the response, it depends. Right. It depends on the institution. Right. Some schools will say, we need to see a teacher from this academic subject. Right. We want to see someone who can speak to your level of writing. We want to see someone who you had as a science teacher, specifically in 12th grade or 11th grade, right? So ask those questions. At Trinity, we've made the move this year to reduce the number of letters of recommendation that we required to complete an application. Right? Previously, it was 3, and we were an institution that said we want to see someone who can speak to your level of writing. And I wanted to see someone a letter of recommendation come from a 11th or 12th grade teacher. Right? That's not always accessible for students, especially in COVID. Right? You're not in the classroom with teachers who might not have the opportunity to get to know you. So we made the move, and thanks to Adrian's leadership, we reduced the number of letters of recommendation we require to be complete. That's not the case everywhere. So I encourage you, students, families, ask those questions about who does the admissions office want to see a letter of recommendation from? Because it's going to differ from institution to institution.
Can I add one more thought on the letter? Be strategic. So get your college list, figure out how many you need, and then start making your requests if you can at that point also. It may be too late to be able to do that. You may need to start asking for letters of recommendation earlier, but to have that foresight so that you're not then scrambling to get the 3rd or the 4th letter, to be able to mix and match the combinations that are needed. So like for us, Naviance usually can show how many letters are needed, or Common App, when you log in, can show you how many letters are needed.
And just something else to add to, for students who are participating in co-curricular activities that are academically oriented, I imagine that may be a smaller cohort than your teacher is teaching. So if you are in robotics and you're interested in engineering, that may be a time for you to be able to tap that resource of the robotics coach to write. Right. But also you want to make sure you consult, if you have a college counselor, consult the admissions officer at the school to see if that's going to be overkill. Where you have, your file is going to be 15 letters of recommendations coming in, which I hope is not an example that I'm trying to set here, but just, that could be opportunities for you to be able to pull in some of those extracurricular activities to be able to talk about your academic preparedness.
I'll show my bias here. I always love seeing letters of recommendations from bosses, right? My line is, if you have a job and your boss actually likes you, your boss is a perfect person to write a letter of recommendation for you. I love seeing that, right? Because that's someone who knows you outside of the classroom, right? Because at a school like Trinity, we're a small community, right? We're looking for students who are going to be academically successful, but we're also building communities, right? We want students who are going to be successful outside of the classroom as well. And I think this last question, I'm going to make this the last question because I'm cognizant of the time. But it's, I think, Jen and Adrian, what are some of the main qualities and characteristics that the question says that admissions teams look for in an applicant? But I'm also going to expand that to coaches, right? As they're trying to build their roster, what are some main qualities and, I guess, besides athletic ability, that communities are looking for?
Yeah, I can go first. I'll leave the best for last there, Adrian. But I mean, I think it's everything that has already really been addressed in some ways here. Initiative and motivation and creativity and all of those things have been addressed in different contexts. But you may have heard this before, but I love it, which is, don't be the one that joins the club, be the one that starts the club. That's like what we want. We want those, initiators, difference makers. Are you going to bring that kind of energy to our teams on the court, on the field, in the classroom, right? So those are just a few. Obviously, we want good people, high character people that are going to do the right thing, even when it's really hard to do the right thing. And how do we figure that out? Well, we've got to connect. We've got to ask questions, and that's what I'm personally, as a coach, what I'm looking for, the high character people and the people who are going to be motivated and take initiative. So, and it's probably, the same as everybody else, and the creativity piece is important. And I think that has kind of come to light throughout COVID, because some people are sending videos of them playing in their backyard, and then other people are saying, I don't have any video because I haven't been on play. So coaches are getting all of these kinds of videos. So which applicant do you want to be in that situation? So, take initiative, be creative, and be the one that starts the club.
Yeah, I think those traits are really, really important, and adding to them your voice and like showing us how they are manifested through your experience. I think so often in this process, students are looking outside of themselves and trying to please us as colleges and universities, as coaches, as conductors, directors, as faculty members. And the best applications, the best students are the ones who go through this process for you. Like, this is really an important next step in your life. And if you take the time, I think Damien started talking about self-reflection, and get to know yourself, you'll be able to show us how you're motivated and what motivates you and how you motivate others. You'll be able to show us how you problem solve, how you encounter something that's challenging and figure out a way through that particular challenge, instead of thinking about what I want to see. Like, I want to see you. So show me who you are, and that's going to be a really fun application to read.
Excellent. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to call this session to a close, right? This has been an honor for me to be able to sit on this panel with the four of you. So to the audience of students and families and counselors, please join me in thanking these four individuals for spending the hour with us. And thank you to the audience for joining us as well. As I mentioned, questions that we didn't get to respond to live, we're going to post on the College Decoded webpage, and kind of a series of frequently asked questions. And I encourage you to attend other sessions that are coming up the next Wednesdays for the next couple of weeks, right? This has been the second session of College Decoded. We've got sessions on writing the college essay. We've got financial aid sessions, right? We're trying to demystify this whole college search process, right? So join us frequently and often, ask questions, engage in the conversation, and hopefully learn more about Trinity along the way, right? So thank you for coming. Adrian dropped in the link for College Decoded and other series or other sessions that are happening, so click that link. But thank you for coming, and stay tuned for more from Trinity College. Take care, everybody.